What is up, guys? TopTierYugioh here, and today I've got a Fiendsmith Snake Eye deck profile for you guys because the Infinite Forbidden set is here. The Fiendsmith cards are here, and with it all, this is the deck to beat. Let's go ahead and get into it. Alright, so starting with our Snake Eye engine, we've got 3 copies of Snake Eye Ash, 3 copies of Diabellstar the Black Witch, 3 copies of Bonfire, and 3 copies of Wanted to search both of them, which is going to give us our 12 starter cards that are in every single Snake Eye deck. But the insane thing about the Snake Eye deck is that these can all start as starters or extenders. You can sequence your plays any way. They're all 1-card combos, but they all can help you play through hand traps as well. Next, we have 2 copies of Snake Eye Poplar, 1 copy of Snake Eye Oak, 1 copy of Snake Eye Diabellstar, and then for the final Snake Eye monster, we have the one, the only, Snake Eye's Flamebird Dragon, which a lot of people for some reason think needs to be banned. I mean, but hey, Block Dragon was fine, right? But yes, Flamebird Dragon is actually insane. This card's incredible. There's not enough that I could say about it. And then finally, to wrap up the Snake Eyes engine, we have 1 copy of Temple and then 1 copy of Original. Moving on to the Fiendsmith engine, we have the Fiendsmith Engraver. This card is incredible, and for some reason it has 3 different effects, all of which are good and impactful in the game, but this card has also impacted a equal number of wallets, which is it is insane. But this is the main card of the new set, Infinite Forbidden. You gotta get it. You gotta get 3 copies of this card. It's just too good to ignore, and it's just absolutely incredible. So 3 copies of Engraver, 2 copies of Fiendsmith Attract, which I know a lot of builds play 1, but I've been testing 2 copies of it because it can also be a starter or extender itself. It's still a free summon of Lurie, which still gets you to your Fiendsmith engine without your normal summon, which is really, really strong. And then also, it gives you a discard outlet, which can allow you to trigger cards like Poplar or Flamebird Dragon in different ways than you normally would. And that added flexibility and versatility makes the Snake Eyes deck all that much better. And then finally, we do play 1 copy of Fabled Lurie, which, you know, for a brick, is one of the better bricks we've seen in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Because even on its own, you can normal summon it, go into a Requiem into Engraver, and then continue comboing from there. Like, even normal summon Lurie is, like, not bad. And if you have other extenders with it, like a Diabellstar or Bonfire or anything else, you can continue with that and then keep going and full combo your opponent, starting with a Fabled Lurie, which is kind of crazy if you think about it. But yeah, there's so much more that I could say about the Fiendsmith engine and how much it synergizes with Snake Eyes, but to avoid this being an hour-long deck profile, we're just going to go ahead and cut this portion here and move on to the next portion of the deck. And so, to wrap up the rest of the main deck, we are moving on to the hand traps, and I really wanted to play a heavy hand trap lineup because this Fiendsmith Snake Eye deck is so good that you need multiple hand traps to stop them. 1 isn't enough almost ever. 2 can sometimes get you there. 3 is really ideal in my opinion, but obviously you cannot build your deck around drawing 3 copies of a hand trap. It's something that you want to consider when building your deck, but you cannot build your entire deck around it. Like, you would have to play 40 hand traps in order to do it consistently, but it is something that I want to keep in mind. But 2 is usually good enough. 3's icing on the cake. But for our hand traps, we're playing 3 copies of Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, 3 copies of Infinite Impermanence, 3 copies of Effect Veiler, 3 copies of Nibiru, and 3 copies of Droll and Lockbird. Droll, I think, is an interesting choice because in previous formats we weren't playing this in the main deck because it simply wasn't impactful enough against the Snake Eye deck on its own, because really the only thing that they need to search is Poplar and then whatever they search off of Poplar. So if Poplar is that 1 search, you're only really trading it with like a Divine Templar, maybe Original, depending on the line of play. And so if that's the case, Divine Temple is only going to lead to 1 body, so you're just trading Droll for 1 body, which is like okay, but it's better to just stop their starters, which is why Ash and Imperm were kind of like the main go-tos, as well as a card like even Ghost Mourner, which could stop Diabellstar on its summon. So you're stopping a starter instead of stopping the extension, which is generally the better play. But now that the Fiendsmith cards are out, as popular and as strong as they are, Droll's become, I think, a main deck staple because it does stop that engine in its tracks. No pun intended on that. But because Engraver simply searches a card from hand, and then Tract also searches a card, if you Droll after the Engraver, your opponent's not going to be able to do anything with that Tract. Now, if you're starting with Tract, however, Tract will search this card Lurie. Now you no longer need to search anything else. It's a little easier to combo through Droll starting with a Tract, which is, hey, a little bit of a reason why I'm playing 2 of it. But I do think that Droll is necessary in this current format. I do also think that you need Nib, because you cannot let these decks combo now. Like the inboard is just too much. So if you can stop it, Nib's going to be a great card to have. But again, you can't really rely on just having one. You need to worry about what you can do with combinations of them. And so Droll and Nib on their own aren't super impactful, but together they can be really good. Or Nib Imperm, Nib Veiler, Droll Imperm, Ash Droll. Like, there are various combinations of hand traps. And now earlier I did mention the importance of drawing multiple hand traps, and in particular at least 2 or maybe even 3 hand traps at times. And as built, this would be a 40 card main deck with 15 hand traps. This actually doesn't meet my own, I would say, personal criteria for hand trap statistics in this current format. And so as built right now, again, 40 card deck, 15 hand traps, you would have a 63% chance of drawing at least 2 hand traps in a 5 card hand. So that's your first 5 going first, or that first 5 going second. And then you would have a 26% chance of drawing more than 2 hand traps in those first 5 cards. And again, this does not meet my own personal, I would say, benchmark for hand traps in this current format. And so I would like to increase the probability of drawing at least 2 hand traps to about 2 out of 3 games, and so 67%. And then I would like to increase the probability of drawing greater than 2 hand traps to at least 1 out of 3 games, 33%. And so the solution that I found to hit these numbers was to simply add 3 hand traps to the main deck, play a 43 card main deck, and have 18 hand traps. And so with that, I decided to add in a copy of Bestial Magnamut, Bestial Druis Worm, and then 1 copy of Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit. So, and then I chose these hand traps in particular because, for one, they all help you extend through your opponent's boards. And so Magnamut and Druis Worm are both bodies on board, so that's going to help you break your opponent's board as well. Druis Worm in particular is going to help you break your opponent's board. Magnamut can search for Flamebreath Dragon or Druis Worm. Searching Flamebreath Dragon is actually pretty good sometimes because you can, again, discard it and then trigger the effect that way. And then Ogre also helps you break boards because it can even be your 6th card, and you can chain it to an Appaloosa to effectively negate it, or an IP or an SP. It's really, really good going first or second. Well, it's, I guess, no better than any other hand trap going first, but going second, it's better than a lot of other hand traps in that it can be your 6th card and still be usable. Now, the other thing that I did want to consider when playing this many hand traps is redundancy. And so between the individual cards, I'm not too worried about drawing multiples. Like, multiple copies of Imperm is not horrible. Multiple copies of Veiler is not horrible. The only 2 cards that you can't have multiples of are Droll and Lockbird and Imperm, or sorry, Droll and Lockbird and Nibiru. But Nibiru, I would want to say, is impactful enough to where it doesn't quite matter. You just want to see it. Droll, on the other hand, I do think could maybe be dropped down to 2 copies. Yeah, Droll could be dropped down to 2 copies, and then maybe instead, I'm gonna keep. Oh, why are both of these Italian? Whatever. But you could replace it with like a Ghost Mourner. I think that would be pretty good. It would give you another way to negate monster effects, which is one of the better ways to stop most decks right now. But also, I really do like that Mourner has some burn damage involved, because that, with the Lacrima, just give you that head start on beating your opponent, making this deck that better in time as well. But that's an option. And then with Ash Blossom, similarly to Nibiru, it's just so impactful that you're going to draw 2 in some games, and it's okay. You want to see it that often. Oh, and the other thing to mention about Droll versus Mourner, Droll also isn't as good when you're going first, because it's not going to help protect your board once you've built it, whereas something that has effect negation, like Imperm, Veiler, Mourner, those are going to help you because you can negate your opponent's monster effects that would break your board. Cards like SP Little Knight, cards like, well, SP is going to chain itself, but there are other things that you could negate, and just negating your opponent's starter cards, negating their Black Witches, negating their Poplars, like, those all come up for sure. Whereas Droll doesn't always have that same effect. I mean, it's good, don't get me wrong, but Mourner is maybe, I think this would be fine. I think you go either way with a 3rd Droll or playing 2 Drolls and a Mourner. You could also just add it as a 44th card and then just play 19 hand traps. That wouldn't be too terrible either. The only other statistic that I was really worried about was seeing a starter card, and the odds of that in a 40 card deck was like, I want to say 92%, but bumping the deck up to 43 cards only dropped the odds of staying a starter down to 89.8%, which is still approximately 90%, which I'm very happy with. And then it leaves the odds of drawing multiples of them and this is assuming 15, and so that's your 12 Snake Eye cards plus your 3 copies of Engraver, so for 15 total. That gives you the odds of seeing more than one at approximately, and this is with 43 cards, it's like 56%, whereas in a 40 card deck it was like 58%. So like the difference isn't very big. And if you increase the deck size to 44 cards, it drops like the odds of seeing one starter to 89%, and then the odds of seeing more than one to 55% or so, which is still really good. Like seeing, that's like opening Ash Black Witch every single game. Like, remember how last format Ash Black Witch was like, your opponent just like won the game basically? It was so hard to stop because most of the time you just didn't have enough hand traps. That's what it's like this time, but like, there are even more copies of that. Like, opening Snake Eye Ash plus Engraver, or Black Witch plus Snake Eye Ash. Like, there's so many combinations of cards that are just really good, and this is being generous because I'm only including the Engravers in that starter slash extender lineup. But if you include the track as well, then the odds obviously get better. And same if you count Poplar, which you can normal summon to start your plays, I'm being very generous here. Being very generous. And then I don't think I mentioned what the statistics for the hand traps go up to once you make these changes, but if you're playing 43 cards and 18 hand traps, it brings your odds of seeing at least 2 of them to approximately 70%, and then seeing more than 2 to 34%, which is, again, what I wanted. I want to see more than 2 in 1/3 of games, and to see at least 2 in 2/3 of games. And now in retrospect, I have no idea how well I explained that, but the general idea, or it's not even an idea, this is just mathematical fact, but if you want to increase the odds of something, the best way to do so is by increasing the number of that card in your deck, or that group of card, not by reducing or changing the number of cards in decks. And so if I want to draw more hand traps, the most important thing is to play more hand traps, because the number of hand traps in the deck is going to have the greatest impact on drawing it, not so much the number of cards in the deck. And so if we play 43, 44 cards, it doesn't make a big difference, but playing more hand traps does. The only thing you have to do is then to consider the odds of drawing the other cards in your deck, which we are, in that being your starters slash extenders, and we're still going to have a really good chance of seeing one and even multiples of those. And so I feel very comfortable playing 43, 44 cards in a deck like this, and I think this is actually what I might do. For the extra, we're going to start off with the Snake Eye Essentials. For those, we've got 1 copy of Promethean Princess, 1 copy of IP, 1 SP, and then 1 Appaloosa. These are what I would call the Snake Eye Essentials. You need these for your Snake Eye combos, and that's honestly about it. These all are going to be a part of your inboard. These are both one of the greatest strengths and weaknesses of the Snake Eye deck. Strengths in that they're all extremely powerful cards, but weakness being that you only play 1 copy of each of them. Each of them is extremely finite, minus the Princess. But Appaloosa, you're only going to summon once, and it has a finite number of counters. IP Masquerena, you're only resolving it once. SP Little Knight's first effect, you're only resolving once. And so really it's Promethean and SP Little Knight's secondary effects that give you sort of some lasting control over the tempo of the game, but I would say that's definitely the weakness of this deck. Now, moving on for the Fiendsmith cards. For the Link monsters, we have 1 copy of Fiendsmith Requiem. This card is actually insane. Just being as generic as it is kind of just unfair. The fact that you can just summon out a copy of the Moon of the Closed Heaven, which is a generic, only requires 2 effect monsters, but it happens to be a Light Fiend, which is all you need for Requiem. Effectively, Requiem just needs 2 effect monsters, and it just takes up 2 slots in your extra deck. That's effectively what it is. Then we have 1 copy of Fiendsmith Sequentia. This allows you to fusion summon, allowing you to summon cards like Lacrima, which can special summon back or add to your hand a Fiendsmith card from your graveyard, or Fiendsmith monster I should say. And for some reason it has an effect to burn. Like, what? It does. Why does this engine have to burn your opponent? Like, I mean, as a Fiendsmith Snake Eye player, I'm very happy that it does, but just for the state of the game, like, it's kind of dirty that it does it. Like, given the time rules, I don't think that the most complex deck of the format should be able to burn your opponent. Like, it's not fair. It's not fair. It's one of the things that just puts this deck over the edge, in my opinion. The fact that you now have the automatic advantage in game 3s, or just close to end of match times, it's actually insane. but we are also playing one copy of Fiendsmith Desiree, and this card it's effectively Hope Harbinger of last format. I'm not going to overhype it, but it does allow you to negate spells and traps, as well as cards like Dark Ruler No More and Forbidden Droplets, which Hope Harbinger couldn't do. And the way you can do that is by chaining a spell or trap to those effects, assuming that they are only stopping you from activating monster effects. Like if they did Droplets, discard only monsters, or not discard, but send only monsters, you could then chain a spell or trap and then chain Desiree to negate the Droplets. Or same with Dark Ruler. They activate Dark Ruler, you chain a spell or trap, then chain Desiree, negating the Dark Ruler. So the ability to do that's actually really good. You can also negate multiple spells and traps at the same time, and so you can negate like a normal spell as well as something that might have a continuous effect. And so if, let's say you're playing against Tempai, and they've got the field spell up, and then they play Sangan Kaiman. You can negate the field spell and Kaiman, and now your opponent's going to be weak to targeting effects. And so there are a lot of scenarios where you can just get like multiple things negated out of this one effect. So I do think it's really powerful. Also, if you combine it with your Requiem and Sequentia's graveyard effect, or I should say equip monster effects, it can be very difficult to get off the board because Requiem is going to give it an extra 600 attack, putting it at 34. Sequentia will keep it from being targeted, so then you have a 3400 Omni Negate, which would be, it's pretty good. And a lot of decks just can't deal with that, for example. So yeah, Desiree's pretty good. Then for the final fusion, we have one copy of Necroquip Princess, which is a complete custom card by Konami TCG. It's actually insane. And what it does for the deck, I know some people play it, some people don't play it, but I prefer it because it turns like simply two bodies into Fiendsmith combo. And the way it works is that normally your Requiem's going to summon out a Fiendsmith and you would need another body to continue from there to make your Sequentia. But with Necroquip Princess, when you summon out your Engraver off of the Requiem, what you can do is then attach the Requiem, equip the Requiem to the Engraver, and now that meets the requirements to contact fuse for Necroquip Princess. So then you can summon out Necroquip Princess, summon back out the Engraver, and then continue from there by making either a Sequentia, a rank 6 Xyz monster, or just whatever you need to do in that moment. So Necroquip Princess allows you to extend your plays in a lot of cases. Now the other thing that comes up is its actual effect. It does have an effect, one of which being that if you send, if monster is sent from your hand to your graveyard to activate a card or effect, then you get to draw a card, which comes up quite often with cards like Nightmare Phoenix or activating Engraver's hand effect. There are just a couple, or hand traps in general, there are a couple of situations where you do get to draw off of Necroquip Princess, which is really, really good. And then the last Fiendsmith card that we're playing is one copy of Beatrice, Lady of the Eternal, one of my favorite cards of all time. I'm always happy to be able to include this in a deck, but very sad because this deck utilizes it so well that I could see this getting banned. So what it does for the deck is, number one, it's very, very easy to make with your Fiendsmith Engine, but it allows you to bridge from your Fiendsmith cards to your Snake Eye cards, because you can easily go into rank 6s with Fiendsmith. You can use that to send Snake Eye Ash to the graveyard and make Promethean Princess, revive the Snake Eye Ash, and now Snake Eye Ash can, do Snake Eye Ash things. You just got the Ash for free without normal summoning anything. That's really, really good. But it also allows you to send other degenerate cards to the graveyard. Cards like Transaction Rollback and the Mayakashi Trap. You can send Black Goat Laughs. You can send Soul and Luna and then set D-Barrier or Different Dimension Ground. Like, you can send Floodgates and set them back with Nightmare Griffin. There are a lot of options that you can do with Beatrice, and this deck has access to all of it. I mean, it effectively gives you access to the entire card pool. And I'm not so sure that the Head and Shoulders clear best deck should also have access to every single card in the game, to be honest. Like, it's maybe a little bit unfair. So I can see Beatrice getting hit. It's not hitting the OCG, but maybe the TCG will hit it, who knows. But for now, it's certainly on the list. Now, that is it for the Fiendsmith and the Snake Eye cards. The last few cards in the extra deck are just like general good cards that you could play, you might not play. It just depends on your preference, but these are the ones that I have come down to. I think you definitely need Selene. Selene's really good. It's going to help you go into Appaloosa easier. It's going to also help you go into access code, which I think you also need. You either need access code or the Raging Phoenix and Zelantis play. You want some way to just OTK your opponent when you need to, and I went with access code just because it is 1 card versus 2, but also even if you're not trying to like go for game, access code can be good for just like breaking apart your opponent's board. So let's say you need to use SP Little Knight to banish something, but you also like, you're not going for game if that happens, but you also just want to clear the board and just have board presence. You can use access code to do that. You can just destroy 2 to 3 cards depending on the setup and sit on it, and that's not horrible, to be honest. Whereas Raging Phoenix and Zelantis don't quite have that same utility. And then the other cards I went with was 1 Nightmare Phoenix. And Nightmare Phoenix I wanted to cut, but it comes up in so many scenarios. Just 1, the ability to deal with back row, that's obviously important, but really it's the battle protection for cards like Appaloosa or SP Little Knight. Like, it comes up so often where you're making Appaloosa and then you're just passing with like a Nightmare Phoenix under it so it can't be destroyed by battle, so you're getting them counters. Your opponent's not just going to attack over it. And then you can do the same with SP Little Knight. So you might have Appaloosa, Phoenix, and then Flamebird and IP in your spell and trap card zone, right? Well, then you can summon back the IP and the Flamebird, go into SP banish something, and now the Appaloosa and the SP cannot be destroyed by battle because they're both co-linked. And that's really, really, really good. It almost makes you want to play Cerberus to play around like Raigeki, Dark Hole, and board breakers like that. I mean, that honestly wouldn't be too bad. But Nightmare Phoenix being fire comes up as well, because when you're fire locked due to the Promethean Princess, it's something you can go into in those situations as well. So I do like the Nightmare Phoenix a lot. And Hida, I do think, is maybe the one that you could cut, but Hida comes up a lot because it's a spellcaster, so that's going to help you go into Selene in certain hands. It's also going to help if your opponent... Wow, that was the 2nd time in this video that my phone ran out of storage, so that is either my cue to hurry this up or to not shoot in 4K. But that's it for the extra deck. You know, yeah, that's definitely the cue to hurry up, because there are so many other cards that I wanted to mention. Extra deck space is so tight. I honestly wanted to play like all of these, but there is not enough time to talk about all of them, but they are all valid replacements for anything. But yeah, that's the extra deck though. Then moving on to the side deck. There's so many cards I want to talk about, but I'm gonna have to do this quickly. But moving on to the side deck, we've got 3 copies of Ghost Sister and Spooky Dogwood. Yeah, we'll talk about everything later. 3 copies of Spooky Dogwood, 3 copies of Molcharmi Perulia, and then 3 copies of Skill Drain. So Fiendsmith Snake Eye is the best deck by far in the current format. It performs the best in both simple and complex game states due to having as many extenders and starters as it has. And the starters are generally all 1 card starters as well. So very simplified game states is very good. Very complex game state is also very, very good. So I no longer am worried about what decks to side for, but instead I think about resource management. And these cards represent the 3 resources in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! You have the Philosophy of Fire, you have Card Advantage, and then you have Tempo. The Philosophy of Fire refers to what you start off with but naturally lose over time, that being your life points, as well as time itself, like turns. This card gives you both of those things. This card gives you extra life and it gives you more turns because of that. So if you resolve this against any modern combo deck, you're going to be, they're either stopping their combo, so it's max C in that regard, or they go through it, you're gaining at least 10,000 life points. No deck can do over 10,000 life points right now, and so you're getting at least 1 extra turn. And because I mentioned like I mentioned earlier, your resources that come from the extra deck, your tempo resources from the extra deck are finite. Your Appaloosa counters, your SP Little Knights, your IP Masquerinas, those are all finite resources. And so giving yourself more turns and more time gives you more chances to break those boards, and your opponent's not going to be building another one like it. And so this card is very, very powerful, and I think underrated, criminally underrated at that. Molcharmi Perulia, it gives you more cards. Being that this deck performs so well in complex game states, I want to have more cards as the Fiendsmith Snake Eye player. It doesn't matter what those cards are. If the deck is built correctly, having more cards on its own will be advantageous, and this is what does it best. This is going to draw you anywhere between 2 and 3 cards in a mirror match. It's also really good against Yubel. It's good against Tenpai, especially now that they have Genroku, which is effectively Tenpai Poplar. It's very good. Molcharmi is a great card. And then for tempo, we have skill drain. And while the deck already has good enough control over the tempo with its extra deck, with its main deck cards, especially with hand traps, it's not very efficient at doing so. But skill drain being a continuous trap does help with that, and the fact that you can turn it off on your own with your Snake Eye cards is very, very advantageous. And so tempo is what this deck needs the most help with, or what I'd say, not help with, but it's what I would focus the most on. And with that, I'm also citing 3 copies of Cosmic Cyclone because I want to have more tempo. I want to be able to play, and Cosmic Cyclone is a card that will allow you to do so if your opponent is stopping you. So if they have Floodgates, if they have their own skill drain, if they have, who knows what, Cosmic Cyclone is a card that will be allowing you to play if your opponent does have it. And if they don't have it, fine, but you want to have it just in case. And it's also versatile enough to be good going first against most decks. Or not that you want it going first, but I guess I should say that, like, if going second you're not able to stop a Floodgate, if you just set it, you're going to be able to maybe stop your opponent. It can act similarly to a defensive card in that regard. So you can stop a card like Nightmare Throne, you can stop Divine Temple, you can banish something out of the opponent's spell and trap card zone that is being set by Poplar or Snake Eye Bellstar. It just has a lot of versatility. It's just a good card overall. And next for tempo, we are playing 1 copy of the Black Goat Laughs. This is a card that can be very powerful when sent off of Beatrice because it gives you another form of disruption that is not coming from the field. So it makes your boards a little bit better against breaker cards like Dark Ruler, Dark Hole, Raigeki, Lightning Storm, etc. Evenly match, all of that stuff. Because you can just send this to the grave with Beatrice and then stop your opponent like that. And it also helps you negate cards like Dark Ruler No More and Droplets with your Fiendsmith Desiree. And so they activate those cards, you chain Black Goat Laughs, then chain Link 3, your Desiree will negate their whatever card they're playing. So it is really good in that regard as well. So it insulates you against those type of cards. And I really think that it makes your combos quite invincible, I would say. And then the last card that I am playing in a side deck is 2 copies of Phantasme. And at first I couldn't choose between Molcharmi and Phantasme. Like, I wanted to play something to just give me more cards, and both of these do that, but they both do it differently. And so Molcharmi has to be activated very, very early in the turn because you want to get that draw off the normal summon, whereas Phantasme can only be summoned off of the summon of a Link monster summon, which makes it to where you're not usually stopping their starter cards, you're stopping their extender. Whatever you draw off of isn't going to be stopping their starter cards, it's going to be stopping their extenders. And so Molcharmi gives you value early on, Phantasme gives you value later on. Both of them are good. Molcharmi is going to usually draw you more cards, like at max. Like, you might get 3, whereas with Phantasme you're generally just going to get 2, but it does help you reshape your hands, which is really, really good. The other thing is that Phantasme doesn't actually give you like more card advantage like Molcharmi does. So like Phantasme is draw 2, shuffle back 2, or draw 2, shuffle back 1, I should say, and you have the body. Whereas Molcharmi is just draw 1, 2, or 3. So Molcharmi is generally going to give you more like new card advantage, whereas Phantasme is like card advantage, but it's because it has the body. Like, it's not added cards in your hand to play next turn, if that makes any sense. I'm trying to speed this up, so I'm not too sure how well I'm explaining this, but yeah, you can play them together though. The other thing about Phantasme that I like is that it does give you some bit of protection against targeting negations such as Imperm, Veiler, and SP Little Knight. That can come up as well. It also can be played as like a 6th card if you're playing a Snake Eye Mirror match, because they're going to summon out their IP Masquerena. You can summon this on your own turn, and that can be very, very powerful as well. And so that will be wrapping up the side deck. And again, my main theory was not to focus as much on the decks or the specific plays or anything like that, because it's the beginning of a new format. Everything is going to be uncertain, but what will not ever change is your resource management. So that was what I want to focus on. So again, we've got this answering the philosophy of fire, these for card advantage, and then these for tempo. If you want to learn more about resource management, check out the videos right here on the screen. These are going to give you everything you need to know about resource management as well as efficiency. It's a whole playlist for just various Yu-Gi-Oh theories that I've made videos about over the years. Most of the videos are pretty old, but they all still and forever will be useful if you're trying to improve your game. So definitely check those out. Let me know what you're doing what you're doing about Fiendsmith Snake Eye right now. Are you playing it, or what are you doing to stop it? You got to be doing something. Let me know down in the comment section below. But alright guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.